Welcome to This Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're joining me today, because we're tackling a topic that is profoundly misunderstood, yet just incredibly important. We're going to explore the really complex and honestly, often invisible relationship between autism and severe eating struggles. For a lot of autistic folks, mealtimes are definitely not about nourishment or enjoyment. Instead, they're a massive source of intense anxiety and overwhelm. So let's dive right in and unpack what's actually going on beneath the surface here. Think about this for a second. Why on earth would a simple, everyday apple trigger an acute stress response? For a lot of people, seeing someone turn down an apple or stick to a very, very narrow list of safe foods is super quickly dismissed as just picky eating. But as we're going to see today, this avoidance is actually a genuine, acute physical stress response. The body is literally signaling danger. Okay, part one, beyond picky eating. Just to give you a sense of scale right out of the gate, AFRID, which stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder, affects roughly 1.98% of children and adults in the general population. So it's a significant number of people for sure, but it still represents a relatively small slice of the overall public. But wow, look what happens when we shift our focus over to the autistic community. That prevalence skyrockets dramatically to 16.27%. This stark contrast immediately tells us something crucial. There is a deep intrinsic link between the autistic experience and the intense food avoidance we see in ARFID. So what exactly is ARFID, clinically speaking? If we look at the standard diagnostic criteria, an individual has to experience nutritional deficiency or a really significant interference with their daily life, like having to avoid school camps or social events just because of the food situation. But here's the absolute most important point to take away. Unlike anorexia or bulimia, ARFID is not driven by body image or a fear of gaining weight. People with ARFID might desperately want to eat more or gain weight, but they literally have a physical inability to overcome their aversions. Which actually brings us right back to our apple. What's so interesting here is how perfectly it illustrates the autistic preference for consistency. Routine is deeply reassuring, right? But an apple, it is highly unpredictable. One day it's perfectly crisp and sweet, and the very next day you bite into one and it's floury or mushy or sour. For an autistic person who is craving consistency, that lack of predictability completely shatters their sense of safety and creates just intense mealtime anxiety. Moving on to part two, the interoception connection. We all know about our external senses, right? Sight, hearing, touch. But there's another absolutely critical sense called interoception. This is your physiological and cognitive ability to sense, interpret, and integrate your internal bodily signals. Basically, it's the internal dashboard that tells you exactly what is happening inside your own body at any given moment. Think about the vital, everyday signals that this interoception dashboard controls. We're talking about hunger, fullness, thirst, pain, and even the basic need to use the toilet. Now, in many autistic individuals, these internal dashboard dials are just wired differently. Some folks might have a blunted sense of hunger. They literally don't feel it at all until they are completely starving. On the flip side, others might be hypersensitive, feeling painfully, uncomfortably full after just taking 2 bites. And recent participatory research really highlights just how critical this is. When you struggle to read your own internal signals, it takes a direct hit on your bodily autonomy, your basic ability to make independent decisions about your own health and comfort. This is exactly why researchers are urgently highlighting the need to center autistic voices in clinical studies. We absolutely have to understand their actual lived experience, not just observe them from the outside. All right, part 3, monotropism and attention tunnels. There's this really fascinating concept called monotropism that explains so much of this. Think of a typical non-autistic brain as being polytropic, kind of like a wide, diffuse room light. It can vaguely attend to multiple things at once without much issue. The autistic mind, however, is often monotropic. It functions much more like a narrow, incredibly intense torch beam. It brilliantly highlights only what is right there within its attention tunnel, and it effectively filters out almost everything else. When that intense torch beam is locked onto a specific interest, it creates an incredibly powerful flow state. But as this lived experience quote so powerfully reveals, that inertia comes at a very real cost. Once I get started, stopping is not an option. Not eating, not drinking, trying to avoid going to the toilet. When all of your attentional resources are poured into that single tunnel, The body's internal interoceptive signals, like hunger and thirst, they basically just go offline. The person literally does not register that they need to eat. Let's dive into part 4, sensory overload and anxiety. When you actually break down the mechanics of this food avoidance, it makes total logical sense. Sensory sensitivities mean certain textures or smells literally cause physical pain or instant gagging. Motor apraxia, which is a difficulty in coordinating chewing and swallowing, creates a terrifying, very real fear of choking. And then you throw in co-occurring gastrointestinal issues, which means the very act of eating is often intrinsically linked to chronic pain. So you see, ARFID isn't stubbornness, not even close. It's a deeply logical avoidance mechanism rooted in genuine physical danger. And honestly, when you combine physical pain, gagging, and a totally valid fear of choking, you don't just get a picky eater, you get trauma. Repeated adverse eating experiences build up this vicious, reinforcing cycle of food-related anxiety. Every single meal becomes a perceived threat. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Neuroaffirmative Support. A massive hurdle we face in supporting autistic individuals is what researchers refer to as the double empathy problem. It's basically the idea that communication breakdowns happen because both neurotypical and autistic people naturally struggle to understand each other's distinct perspectives. Neuroaffirmative support urges caregivers and professionals to actively bridge this gap. It's about replacing the rigid demand to just conform to neurotypical norms with genuine empathy and mutual understanding. Remember that intense torch beam of monotropism we just talked about? Well, true neuroaffirmative support means actually joining the autistic person right there inside their attention tunnel. Instead of battling against their focus and forcibly dragging them out of their comfort zone, we need to align our support with their personal interests. That's how you build real cognitive connections. Let's look at how this works in a practical setting, like teaching interoception. Instead of just forcefully setting a timer to drink water, which, let's be honest, does absolutely nothing to teach bodily awareness, we can scaffold the skill. You start by monitoring visible signs, like the color of urine. Then you link that external sign to physical feelings, like having a dry mouth or feeling sluggish. Over time, you patiently help the individual build their own internal interoceptive cue. It's all about building lasting autonomy. To do this right requires a total paradigm shift from caregivers. Clinical nutritionist Margot White strongly advocates that we absolutely must let go of our rigid neurotypical ideas about what dining should look like. Mealtimes don't have to be seated perfectly at a table with 3 balanced food groups, especially if that exact setup is what's creating the terror in the first place. White's neuroaffirming approach is just incredibly actionable. First up, fat is best. Any safe calorie is a good calorie. Second, pressure leads to shutdown, not progress. Coaxing and forcing only deepens the existing trauma. Third, small steps matter immensely. Celebrate them. And lastly, always prioritize the individual's safety and bodily autonomy over social conformity. Margot White sums it up so beautifully here. Make room for a relationship with food that is built on trust, not fear. I mean, that is the ultimate goal, isn't it? When we finally remove the pressure, we allow that fragile trust to slowly, surely rebuild. So, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on today. Instead of constantly asking how we can fix an autistic person's eating, ask yourself this: how can we change our own behaviors and expectations to transform mealtimes from a stressful battleground into a true safe haven? By leading with empathy and real understanding, we can absolutely make all the difference. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this crucial topic today, and hey, keep learning.